Today, we are diving deep into a really powerful, and let's be honest, pretty controversial idea: predestination. We're going to look at the Apostle Paul's arguments and see how he tackled this ancient clash between God's will and our choices. You'll see it's a debate that's just as alive today as it was 2,000 years ago. So let's just kick things off with the question that's at the heart of all this. Is your life story already written? I mean, are you truly the one writing your own destiny? Or are you maybe just playing a part that's already been laid out for you? This isn't some New Age dilemma. This is an ancient argument that was absolutely raging in the world the Apostle Paul lived in. Now, this whole debate was not new when Paul came along. Not by a long shot. The intellectual world was buzzing with these ideas. You had both Jewish and Greek thinkers who had already staked out their positions, creating this whole spectrum of belief from, total determinism all the way to absolute free will. So, on one side, you've got groups like the Essenes in the Jewish world and the Stoics in Greek philosophy. For them, life was pretty much predetermined, all guided by fate or some divine plan. And then, on the complete other end of the spectrum, were the Sadducees and the Epicureans. They were all about human choice and our responsibility, and they totally rejected the idea of some pre-written cosmic script. And to really get where Paul was coming from, you have to understand the Jewish world he was speaking to. These weren't just philosophical ideas floating around. The Essenes, they were at one extreme, 100% total predestination. The Sadducees were at the other extreme, 100% total free will. And then, trying to find some middle ground, you had the Pharisees, which was Paul's own background, by the way, who kind of said, well, it's a mix of both. This is the charged atmosphere Paul just walks right into. And Paul does not tiptoe around this debate. In his letter to the Romans, specifically in chapter 9, he wades directly into the fight with a really bold case for God's sovereign choice, what we now call predestination. Paul's first major piece of evidence, it's the story of two twins, Jacob and Esau. He quotes the ancient text, and he points out something huge. Before they were even born, before they had a chance to do a single thing, good or bad, a divine decision had already been made about their lives. So, here's the kicker, the absolute key to what Paul's arguing. God's choice isn't a reaction. It's not like God peeked into the future, saw who would be a good person, and then picked them. Nope. According to Paul's logic right here, the choice was made entirely because of God's own purpose, totally separate from anything Jacob or Esau would ever do. Okay, so if the Jacob and Esau example raised your eyebrows, get ready for Paul's second one, Pharaoh. This one is even more of a challenge. Paul argues that God didn't just, let Pharaoh be stubborn. He says God actively raised him up for the very purpose of showing off his power. The conclusion is pretty stark. God has mercy on who he wants, and he hardens who he wants. Okay, so when you hear all this, the totally natural reaction for us today and for people back then is this little alarm that goes off in your head. A voice that asks, wait a minute, how is any of that fair? And Paul knew this. He saw that objection coming a mile away. He basically puts the question right out there, saying what his readers are absolutely thinking. If God chooses some people and hardens others, and it has nothing to do with what they've done, can you really call God just? Paul's first answer is this really famous analogy of the potter and the clay. He essentially says, look, who are we, the clay, to argue with the potter? Doesn't the one who makes the pot have the right to make one for special occasion and another for everyday use, all from the exact same lump of clay? But hold on, that potter analogy isn't the final word on justice. See, the whole thing only seems unfair if you make one huge assumption, that the everyday pot is destined for eternal punishment. But if you look at Paul's letters as a whole, a different idea comes through, one that points to an eventual restoration for all of creation. And if that's the case, then hardship and judgment aren't a final sentence. They're more like temporary, corrective tools in a much, much bigger plan. So, how can God desire one thing but seem to plan for something else? Well, the key to unlocking this whole paradox might be hiding in a really subtle but powerful difference in the original Greek text, specifically two different words that both get translated as will. So the first word is thelema. You can think of this as God's desire, his wish list, his perfect moral standard. It's what he commands and wants us all to do. And here's the crucial part. This kind of will can be resisted. But then you have this second word, boulema, and this one is a whole different ballgame. This isn't just a wish. This is God's unchangeable plan, his sovereign resolve, the actual blueprint for history. And this will, according to Paul, cannot be resisted. Let's plug this back into the Pharaoh situation, and you'll see how it works. God's thelema, his expressed desire, was simple: let my people go. Pharaoh resisted this. He said no. But God's boulema, his unshakable plan, was to use that very resistance to show his power. So in that context, God's action was, I will harden your heart. And that Pharaoh could not resist. It's not a contradiction. It's just two different levels of God's will happening at the same time. All right, let's zoom out a bit now and look at this whole idea of sovereignty from a higher perspective. There's a fantastic story that helps illustrate what this view from the top might look like. So the story goes, there's an African king, and he has this friend who, no matter what happens, good or bad, always has the same reaction. This is good. So one day they're out hunting, there's an accident, and the king loses his thumb. And sure enough, the friend says, this is good. Well, the king is furious, so he throws his friend in jail. About a year goes by, and the king gets captured by a tribe of cannibals. They're getting ready to eat him, but they notice his missing thumb. Turns out they're superstitious and won't eat anyone who isn't whole, so they let him go. The very thing that seems so bad actually saved his life. The king rushes back to the jail to apologize. He says, you were right. It was good that I lost my thumb, but it was so awful that I threw you in jail. And his friend's reply is just brilliant. He says, no, that was good too. If I hadn't been in jail, I would have been with you. From that higher perspective, both seemingly terrible events were actually part of a larger good. Now, this idea of different levels of reality shows up in two more Greek words for power. You've got dunamis, which is God's power. It's inherent, it's ultimate, it's sovereign. It's that view from the top. And then you have exousia. That's our power. It's delegated authority, it's limited, and it always operates under that higher power. So this is really where it all comes together. On our level, down here on the ground, we operate with real, delegated authority, our exousia. Our choices matter. They have real consequences. But that entire sphere of human action, all of our choices and their consequences, is contained within the unshakable framework of God's ultimate sovereign plan, his dunamis. And all of this leaves us with one final massive question to chew on. If the freedom we feel, our exousia, is totally real, but it always exists inside this bigger, sovereign plan, this dunamis, then what does that actually mean for our understanding of choice, of responsibility, and where our true freedom really lies?